Close your eyes now. Let your body grow heavy, settled, and still. Take one slow breath in through your nose, and release it gently. Let the world outside grow quiet. Let your thoughts drift, one by one, like leaves carried on a slow river, away and away into the dark. Tonight, we are going somewhere ancient. Tonight, we walk beneath a silver moon into the forests of old Greece, where the trees are tall and fragrant with pine, and the stars hang low and luminous, like lanterns left burning by the gods themselves. We are going to follow someone you may have heard of, though perhaps you have never heard her story told quite like this. We are going to walk with Artemis. Asterisk. Long, long before the cities of the ancient world were built, before the first marble temples were raised and the first olive groves were planted on terraced hillsides, there was a sea. That sea was the Aegean, and it was ancient even then. Its waters were deep and blue and restless, shifting between islands of pale stone and gray rock. Islands with no names yet, islands waiting to become something. One of those islands was called Delos. Delos was small. If you walked its entire length, you might be done before the afternoon sun reached its peak. Its shores were quiet, its soil thin and rocky, its grasses bleached pale by the salt wind that came in off the water. There were no great trees on Delos, no deep forests, no rushing rivers. It was a humble island, unremarkable in almost every way. And yet, the gods chose it. They chose it because of what Delos had that no other island possessed. Stillness. At the center of the island, there was a small lake, perfectly still, perfectly clear, so still on certain mornings that the sky above it was perfectly mirrored below, and you could stand at its shore and feel as if you were standing between two heavens. Beside the lake grew a single palm tree, slender and ancient, its fronds moving slightly in the wind that came in from the sea. It was beneath this palm tree that the great goddess Leto came to rest. Leto was a Titaness, one of the older divine beings who had existed before Zeus and his brothers and sisters rose to reshape the world. She was gentle and quiet by nature, clothed in veils of deep blue and silver, her hair dark as the night sky, her expression one of great patience and sorrow intermingled. She had been wandering for a long time, wandering and searching for a place where she could stop. Zeus, the king of the gods, was the father of her children, and Hera, queen of the gods, proud and fierce, had sent a decree across all the lands of the earth. No island, no continent, no country, no shore, no forest or mountain or meadow was to receive Leto and allow her to give birth. Hera's jealousy was a powerful thing, and the lands of the earth obeyed. All but one, Delos, that humble and floating island, had no great claim to anything. It had nothing to lose, and so, in its smallness and its quietness, it agreed to receive her. Leto came to the shore. She walked across the pale grass. She found the lake so still and clear. She found the palm tree, and there, with her arms around that slender ancient trunk, with the salt wind moving over her and the stars beginning to appear in the great dark sky above, she waited. And after what felt like ages, after the moon had risen and set and risen again, the children came. First came a boy, golden as sunlight. His eyes, when they opened, were already bright, already warm, already certain of their place in the world. He was wrapped in a radiance that made the sea glow faintly at the horizon, as if the water itself was glad. This was Apollo, the god of the sun, of music, of prophecy and poetry. Even as an infant, there was a warmth about him that touched everything nearby, a gentleness wrapped in brilliance. But before Apollo, in the quiet breath just before the turning point of that long divine labor, another child came. A girl. She arrived. First, into the silence and the dark, into the cool night air above the still lake on Delos. She arrived quietly, without fanfare, without the golden blaze that would accompany her brother. She came with the calm of someone who had already decided, long before entering the world, exactly who she was. This was Artemis. She was born of moonlight and salt air and patience. She was born beside still water and an ancient palm tree on a quiet island at the edge of the Aegean Sea. And from the first moment, she was fully herself. It is said that almost immediately, the infant Artemis turned to help her mother through the birth of Apollo, that she became, in those first hours of her existence, a midwife, a protector, a guardian of the threshold between one world and the next. This is why, in later centuries, women in labor would call upon her. Why mothers bringing children into the world would whisper her name. She began her divine role not with a sword or a bow or a crown, but with her hands, helping. There is something deeply moving in that image, if you let yourself rest inside it. A newborn goddess, luminous and quiet, already caring for another, already watching over, already protecting. The island of Delos glowed that night. The sea around it was calm and silver. The palm tree bent slightly in a warm and wordless breeze, and the still lake reflected the stars above, and beneath that reflection, far below the surface of the dark water, something ancient seemed to acknowledge what had happened here. The world had two new gods, and both of them, in their different ways, would carry light. The ancient Greeks told a story about the young Artemis that feels, even now, deeply tender and true. She was still very young, perhaps 3 years old in the way gods are young, which is to say she was still in the bright early period of her existence, still learning the shape of herself, when Zeus, her father, lifted her up onto his knee. Zeus was vast and powerful, his presence like the electricity before a storm, his beard streaked with cloud and shadow, but he was tender with his children, especially with this one. He asked her, as fathers sometimes ask their daughters, with a warmth that opens the world into possibility, what she wanted. What gift would she like? What would please her most? And Artemis, that quiet and certain child, looked up at her father with eyes the color of night forests, and she answered him, not with one wish but with several, carefully, precisely, as if she had already given this a great deal of thought. She asked for a silver bow and a quiver of arrows. She asked to never be required to marry, to remain always free and unbound. She asked for mountains and wilderness to call her own. She asked for hunting companions, the nymphs, daughters of the wild places, who would run with her through the forests. She asked for sacred deer to pull her silver chariot across the night sky. She asked for a name that would be remembered throughout all of time. She asked, in essence, for freedom, and for the wild. Zeus looked at her for a long, quiet moment, and then he smiled, that rare and real smile that the king of the gods kept mostly hidden, and he said yes, to all of it. He granted her everything she asked, and more, because watching her ask for it, he understood that she was not asking for power in the way that gods sometimes hunger for power. She was asking to be true to herself, and there is no gift a father can give that is greater than that. The silver bow came to her, fashioned by the Cyclopes themselves, those ancient and enormous craftsmen who lived deep within the earth, hammering metal over volcanic fires. The bow was long and elegant, and the arrows that filled her quiver were swift as moonlight, as precise as silence. And she went then into the mountains, into the forests, into the wild places of the world that would become her home. She never looked back, and in this, there, is something to take with you into sleep tonight. The image of a young goddess who knew herself so completely that when offered anything in the universe, she asked only to be free, and to belong to the wild, and to protect the things that could not protect themselves. Breathe that in. Let it settle in your chest. Let your muscles soften around it. There is something quietly heroic in knowing what you truly want. After Artemis received her gifts from Zeus, she did not go straight to the mountains. First, she went looking for companions. She walked to the edges of the wild places, to the forest boundaries where the world of human settlement faded and the old world began. The world of tall trees and mossy stone and cool running water and birdsong at dawn. And from those edges she called. And they came. The nymphs. In Greek understanding, nymphs were not merely mythological creatures to be catalogued and described. They were something far more subtle and alive than that. They were the spirits of the natural world, each one tied to a specific stream, a specific grove of oak trees, a specific pool of still water deep in a mountain forest. They were not quite immortal, though they lived for centuries. They were not quite mortal, though they could be hurt and could feel sorrow. They were the life of the landscape made visible. The nymphs who came to Artemis were of many kinds. The naiads were water spirits. Their hair was always slightly damp, their eyes the shifting gray-green of river shallows, their laughter like the sound of water moving over smooth stones. The dryads were the spirits of trees, oak trees especially, and they moved through the forest as if they were part of it, which in some sense they were, each one bound to a particular tree, feeling its seasons, its growth, its shelter given to birds and wind and rain. There were mountain nymphs and sea nymphs, meadow nymphs and nymphs of the deep caves, nymphs who were ancient beyond counting, and nymphs who were young and curious, drawn to the silver-bowed goddess who moved through their forests with such quiet certainty. They formed her hunting band, her sacred sisterhood. 60 of them attended her closely, 60 Oceanids, daughters of the sea-encircling river Oceanus, and another 20 who cared for her hounds and her chariot. They hunted beside her. They rested beside her on the banks of forest streams. They waded through silver rivers and climbed the flanks of mountains in the cool hours before dawn. They slept beneath the same stars. They heard the same owls calling from the high branches. Among the most beloved of her nymphs were women like Britomartis, the sweet virgin, who had been devoted to the goddess since the earliest days, and Callisto, whose story we will return to, for it is one of the deepest and most sorrowful in all of Artemis's mythology. But for now, picture the hunting band moving through the forest in the early evening, when the light is amber and low and the shadows are long between the trees. Artemis is at their center, taller than the others, silver-bowed, her dark hair bound back from her face. The nymphs move around her like a stream moves around a stone at its center, laughing softly, talking in low voices, bending to examine a flower or a footprint in the soft earth. They are not hunting yet. They are simply moving through the world that belongs to them, in the last warm light before the moon rises. And there is something about that image, those women in the forest, moving freely through the trees as the sky turns slowly from amber to violet to deep and starlit black, that feels like something that should be allowed to exist forever. Settled now, softer. The forest around you is patient. The nymphs pass like a murmur through the leaves. Every culture has its sacred places, the specific plots of earth where the divine feels near, where the air is different, where silence holds a quality that is not quite ordinary silence. For the ancient Greeks, these places were everywhere, but for Artemis, they were especially concentrated in the wild, high, remote corners of the world. Her mountains, her forests, her territories begin with Mount Cynthus on Delos, the mountain of her birth. It was not a tall mountain by any measure, rising only a few hundred feet above the surrounding sea, but it was hers from the beginning. The ancient Greeks built a small sanctuary there, open to the sky, facing east, where the first light of morning would touch it. Pilgrims climbed its rocky path in silence, carrying small offerings, honey, wine poured into the earth, flowers gathered from the lower slopes. From the peak of Cynthus, on a clear day, you could see the other islands spread across the Aegean like stepping stones between worlds. And at night, from that peak, the sky was extraordinary. The Milky Way arched directly overhead, and the sea below reflected it, so that standing at the summit felt like standing inside the night sky itself. Artemis was called Cynthia because of this mountain. Cynthia, she of Cynthus. And then there was Arcadia. Arcadia was the mountainous heartland of the Peloponnese in southern Greece, a place of high passes and deep forest valleys, of rivers that appeared from limestone caves and disappeared again, of bears and wolves and eagles and all the wild creatures that had been pushed to the edges of the world everywhere else but had remained here, in this green and difficult country. Arcadia was wilder than the rest of Greece. Its people were older than most Greek tribes, and they kept older customs. They remembered the world before the cities. Artemis loved Arcadia. She hunted its dark pine forests in the deep of winter when the snow lay thick between the trees and the only sounds were the wind and the occasional crack of a branch under the weight of ice. She ran its high ridges in summer, when the air above the treeline was thin and cold and crystalline, and the view stretched to the sea in every direction. She waded its cold rivers, she climbed its limestone crags, she rested in the shelter of its caves when the mountain storms rolled in from the north. In Arcadia, there was a place called the Alpheos River, and along its banks, hidden in the deep shade of plane trees and willows, there were sacred pools where Artemis and her nymphs were said to bathe after the hunt. The water of the Alpheos was clear and cold and faintly green where it ran shallow over mossy stones, and the pools where it deepened and slowed were dark and perfectly still. No fisherman entered those pools. No shepherd brought his flock too near. Everyone knew whose water it was. Further north, in the region of Attica, there was the sacred grove and temple of Broron, a place we will speak of more in later chapters. Nestled at the foot of hills covered in dark ilex oak, beside a lagoon where egrets moved in the early morning light and the sound of the sea was always just barely audible, behind and beneath every other sound. And in Ephesus, on the western coast of what is now Turkey, there rose perhaps the most spectacular thing ever built in her name, a temple that the ancient world would count among its 7 greatest wonders. But that too is a story for a little later. For now, rest in the forest. Feel the pine needles soft under your feet. The air is cool and slightly damp and smells of resin and stone and clean water. High above, through the canopy, a few stars are visible, pale and patient. The wind moves through the upper branches with a sound like breathing. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. It would be easy to misunderstand what it meant for Artemis to be a goddess of the hunt. The modern mind, shaped by centuries of different understanding, might imagine hunting as a kind of contest, a victory of the hunter over the hunted, something triumphant and perhaps violent. But that is not what the ancient Greeks meant when they gave Artemis her silver bow. For them, the hunt was something far more nuanced. It was a relationship between the predator and the prey, between human need and the natural world's provision, between life and death and the sacred thread that ran between them. Artemis was not the goddess of killing. She was the goddess of the threshold, the moment of perfect stillness before the arrow flies, the held breath in the forest, the eye trained on the movement in the shadows between the trees. She presided over that moment of absolute presence, when every distraction falls away and the hunter and the hunted exist in one shared space of concentrated awareness. Hunters in ancient Greece prayed to her before they entered the forest. They asked her permission. They offered her the first portion of what they caught, a part of the animal left at a forest shrine, a small fire lit in her honor at the edge of the treeline at dawn. Because without her blessing, the forest yielded nothing. Without her goodwill, the hunter returned empty-handed. The animals were hers. Every deer, every boar, every bird in the high branches. She knew them all. She watched over them. And sometimes, when the offering was right and the heart was honest, she allowed a portion to be taken. There is something deeply sustainable in this vision of hunting. Something ecological, even. A recognition that the wild world is not a resource to be taken without limit, but a living community of beings to be approached with reverence and gratitude. Her sacred animals were many, the deer above all others, specifically the hind, the female deer with her large gentle eyes and her soft tawny coat and her ability to move through the thickest forest without sound, like a thought half remembered. The deer was sacred to Artemis not as prey but as companion. The great golden-horned hind of Serenia was one of her most beloved creatures, an animal so swift and so rare that capturing it was considered nearly impossible, and the very attempt was considered a kind of sacred transgression. Her deer drew the chariot she rode across the night sky, their hooves making no sound, their antlers gleaming silver in the dark. The bear, too, was sacred to her. In the forests of Arcadia, bears moved like dark dreams between the trees, and they were considered her animals, under her protection. At Broron, young girls dedicated to her service were called arctoi, bears, and they performed rituals in bear costumes, moving through the torchlit sanctuary in great slow-turning dances that mimicked the movement of the bears in the hills above. Her hunting dogs were famous throughout the mythological world, swift and loyal, with deep musical voices that rang through the valleys like bells when they scented their quarry. The god Pan himself, it was said, gave Artemis her finest hounds, animals of extraordinary gift, able to run down any creature in any terrain. They ran with her through the night forests, their panting warm and steady in the cold air. Picture that pack now, moving through the dark trees, the dogs ranging ahead and to either side, their noses low to the ground, their tails sweeping. Artemis moving at their center, her silver bow across her shoulder, her steps making no more sound than the deer she loves. The nymphs spreading out through the trees on either side, silent as shadows. The forest holds its breath. The stars move overhead in their slow ancient wheel. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, a deer pauses at the edge of a stream, lifts its head, scents the air. Its eyes catch the moonlight. For a moment, it is perfectly still. Then Artemis smiles and calls the dogs back, and the deer moves on. Not every night ends in a hunt. Some nights end in the simple miracle of witnessing. There is something it is important to understand about Artemis and the moon. She was not always the goddess of the moon. In the offerings at crossroads and forest shrines, they asked for her protection through the turning night. And somewhere above all of this, the moon moved across the sky in its long, slow arc, and in it moved Artemis, watching, silver-eyed, patient, her chariot drawn by her sacred deer, their hooves making no sound in the darkness above the clouds. Think of the moon tonight. Think of where it is in the sky outside whatever walls surround you now. Think of its light falling through your windows, or falling somewhere beyond your walls onto trees and rooftops and quiet streets. The same light that fell on the forests of ancient Arcadia, on the marble steps of the temple at Ephesus, on the still lake at the center of Delos. The same moon, the same light, and somewhere in that light, if you are quiet enough, you might feel something ancient and calm and watchful, like a goddess who has been keeping her rounds since before your civilization was a dream. Breathe with that feeling for a moment. The moon is old, and it is with you now. Not all of Artemis's stories are entirely peaceful. Some of them carry the weight of consequence, of the deep ancient understanding that certain things in the world are sacred and inviolable, and that approaching them without reverence can change everything. The story of Actaeon is one of these, but we will tell it gently. We will let it drift through this night like a sad and beautiful dream, carrying its wisdom without its sting. Actaeon was a young man, a hunter, one of the finest of his generation, skilled and brave, trained in the ancient arts of tracking and pursuit. He roamed the forests of Scythian, the great wooded mountain of Boeotia in central Greece. He was, by all accounts, a good young man. His fault, if it can be called a fault, was not malice or arrogance or any particular moral failing. It was simply this: he went where he should not have gone. One summer afternoon, when the sun was high and the forest was very quiet, and his hunting dogs had scattered across the slopes in search of a fresh scent, Actaeon wandered deeper into the trees than usual. He was following the sound of water, perhaps, or simply the natural wandering of a mind not fully present. And he came, through a gap in the trees, into a hidden glade. The glade was enclosed on all sides by tall trees, plane trees and laurel, their leaves creating a canopy that broke the afternoon light into shifting pieces of gold and shadow. At its center was a pool. The pool was fed by a spring that emerged from the rock face at the far side, its water so clear that the white stones of the bottom were perfectly visible below. Moss covered the rocks around the pool. Ferns grew at the water's edge. And in the pool, bathing after the long morning's hunt, was Artemis. Her silver bow and quiver hung on a branch nearby. Her hunting garments were folded on a flat rock. Her nymphs were in the water around her, or kneeling at the edges, pouring water from their cupped hands over her shoulders and her dark hair. It was the most private of moments, the most inviolable of sanctuaries, and Actaeon stood at the edge of the glade, frozen, unable to move. He had not come seeking this. He had not crept up slyly or planned an intrusion. He had simply wandered through the wrong gap in the wrong trees at the wrong moment, and now he stood with his hands at his sides and the afternoon light falling around him and the sacred scene before him, and there was nothing at all he could do to make it not have happened. Artemis saw him. The nymphs cried out. They moved to shield their goddess, crowding around her. But Artemis herself was still. Her eyes met those of the young hunter across the water. And in that gaze, that long, still, terrible gaze, something was decided. Ancient stories give different accounts of what happened next. Some say Artemis spoke. Some say she simply raised her hand. In the most common telling, she scooped up a handful of water from the pool and cast it toward him, and where the drops touched him, he began to change. It happened slowly, the way things change in dreams. A spreading of sensation from the skin inward, a strange heaviness in the skull, an elongation of the bones. His hunting companions, emerging through the trees from their separate searches, saw not their master but a great stag, antlered, wide-eyed, standing at the edge of a glade where no stag should be. And they did what hunting dogs do. They gave voice. The ancient Greeks told this story as a lesson, not in cruelty, but in the recognition that some things in the world are sacred in ways that demand our humility, that there are places and moments that are not ours to enter, that the divine, the wild, the untouched, the purely itself, requires a boundary that we approach only with the deepest reverence. Artemis did not hate Actaeon. That is important to understand. She did not act from spite or from a desire to cause suffering. She acted from the ancient, impersonal law of sacred space, the understanding that some thresholds, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. The forest keeps its own rules, and some of them are older than mercy. But rest now even in the weight of that story, because there is also tenderness in it. The tenderness of a world in which things are still truly sacred, in which some spaces belong only to themselves, in which the divine can still be encountered, unexpectedly, in a glade in the deep forest on a summer afternoon. The pool is still there, in the imagination. The water still moves over white stones. The moss is green and quiet. The ferns lean gently at the edge. And the glade is empty now. Only the trees and the water and the light. Of all the stories that follow Artemis through mythology, perhaps none is more tender or more sorrowful than the story of Callisto. Let it come to you quietly, the way certain memories come, not with noise or sharpness, but with a soft and gentle weight. Callisto was one of Artemis's most beloved nymphs, not just a companion but a confidant, one of those presences that make any life richer simply by being in it. She was an Arcadian, daughter of the king Lycaon, beautiful in the way that the wild places of the earth are beautiful, not decoratively, not adorned, but with the inherent grace of something that has grown as it was meant to grow. She had sworn the oath that all of Artemis's companions swore, to remain free, unmarried, devoted to the hunt and to the goddess and to the wilderness they moved through together. For many years, they ran the forests of Arcadia together, Callisto and Artemis and the band of nymphs, and the mountains were theirs and the mornings were theirs and the long evenings by the fire were filled with the comfortable silence of people who know each other deeply and do not need to fill every moment with words. But Zeus saw Callisto, and Zeus, for all his greatness, for all his power, was capable of terrible choices. He came to her in disguise, in a shape that made it impossible for her to refuse what happened. And afterward, Callisto was changed, not in any way that was visible at first. She still moved through the forest, still drew her bow, still waded into the cold morning rivers. But something had shifted in her, and she carried it silently, the way wild animals carry their wounds, privately, without display. It was at the annual washing of the bows, a ritual cleansing that the nymphs performed each year at a sacred pool, when the truth was revealed. Callisto undressed slowly. She could not hide what she carried, and the nymphs saw and fell silent. Artemis turned away. Her face did not change, but those who knew her well could read the stillness in it, could understand that beneath that stillness was something complex and deep, grief and anger, and the particular sorrow of someone who has protected a space of purity and watched it be breached by forces beyond her power to stop. Callisto was sent away from the band. The versions of what happened next vary. In one, Hera transformed Callisto into a bear out of jealousy and rage. In another, it was Artemis herself. In still others, Zeus was responsible for the transformation, either as a way of hiding Callisto from Hera's wrath or for reasons lost to time. What all versions agree on is this: Callisto became a great brown bear. She walked the forests of Arcadia where she had once run as a woman, moving on 4 legs through the familiar undergrowth, recognizing with the confused and aching intelligence that remained in her the streams where she had once bathed, the clearings where she had once rested, the particular slant of morning light through particular stands of trees. She wandered like this for years, and eventually her son, the child she had born after Zeus, grew to a young man named Arcas, and he became a hunter, a very fine hunter, trained in those same Arcadian forests. And one day, in the forest, the young hunter came face to face with a great bear, He did not know her. How could he? She had no way to speak to him. She lifted herself onto her hind legs, as bears do when trying to perceive something, and raised her great arms. And the young hunter raised his spear. What happened in that frozen moment? The bear who had been a woman, the young man who did not know he faced his mother, was witnessed from Olympus. And Zeus, whatever his failings, could not let it end that way. He lifted them both into the sky. You know them even now on any clear night when you look up. The great bear, Ursa Major, turning slowly around the northern pole, the same circling path she has always kept. And near her, the smaller bear, Ursa Minor, her son, keeping her company in the dark. Callisto became a constellation. She became permanent. She became part of the structure of the night sky, written in stars, turning endlessly in the dark above the forests of Arcadia that she had loved. This is perhaps the most Greek of transformations, the idea that nothing is ever entirely lost, that grief and love and loss can be transmuted into something that persists, that the night sky is not empty or cold but full of stories, full of beings who were once something else, carrying their transformations lightly in the dark. Tonight, wherever you are, the bears are turning overhead, slow and patient and eternal. Sleep beneath them. Let them keep watch. There is one more story from among those Artemis carried with her through the centuries, and it is perhaps the most quietly heartbreaking of all, the story of Orion. In Greek mythology, Orion was the greatest mortal hunter who ever lived. He was the son of Poseidon, god of the sea, and he had inherited something of his father's boundless, restless nature, something oceanic in his ambition, something deep water in his capacity for feeling. He was very large, very strong, very skilled. He could move through the most difficult terrain with ease. He could track any animal across any landscape. He was in love with the wilderness in the same sincere and fundamental way that Artemis was. They found each other as such people do. The accounts of how they met vary. Some say he came to the island of Chios, where Artemis was hunting. Some say they encountered each other in the forests of Crete. Whatever the details, what happened between them was, by the standards of Artemis's mythology, extraordinary. Because Artemis, who had sworn herself to freedom and solitude, who had asked her father as a child to never be bound to another, who had kept that vow through all the long centuries of her existence, Artemis felt something for Orion that she had felt for no one else. Call it friendship at its deepest. Call it recognition, the recognition that a wild creature sometimes feels when it encounters something that moves through the world in the same key, at the same frequency. Whatever its nature, it was real, and it was tender, and the ancient Greeks who told this story understood that even for a goddess sworn to freedom, there could still be something like love. They hunted together, through forests and over mountains, through the long blue dawns and the honey-colored evenings. And there was in their hunting a quality of joy that Artemis's eternal hunting companions, the nymphs, had sometimes noticed was absent. A lightness, a ease, a sense of two people who had found the rare thing of someone else who understands exactly who they are. Apollo saw his sister and grew worried. Whether his worry was born of protective concern or of something else, of the ancient understanding that some unions between the divine and mortal carry impossible weight, he acted. The versions differ here as they often do. In one, Apollo challenged Artemis to a shooting contest, pointing to a distant object moving far out on the sea. It was Orion swimming, though Artemis did not know it. She took the shot. Her aim, as always, was perfect, and when she swam out to retrieve what she had struck, and found instead the body of the one she had lost, the grief that came to her was as real and heavy as the body she held in the water. She set him in the sky, just as she had set Callisto. Orion is there now, on any winter night, his belt 3 bright stars in a perfect line, his great figure spread across the southern sky, the hunter made permanent, made starlight, made a thing that every winter night brings back and every summer night takes away, as if even in death he must still be moving. And high above him, just barely visible on the northern horizon when he is at his height, the constellation of the Scorpion that, in some tellings, ended his life. Artemis placed them so they would never be in the sky together, so that Orion would always rise in peace. It is a kind of mercy, expressed at the only scale that remained available. The Greeks understood something in this story that is worth carrying into sleep with you. The understanding that even the most self-sufficient beings, the most complete and sovereign natures, the most sworn to solitude souls, even they can be changed by encounter. Even they can know the specific gravity of someone irreplaceable. Even they carry their losses gently upward and set them among the stars. Look for Orion on a clear winter night. He is still there, still hunting, still magnificent, still moving across the dark. Artemis placed him carefully. There were many temples built to Artemis across the ancient world. Shrines in forest clearings and cave entrances. Simple stone altars on mountain passes. Sacred groves where the trees themselves were the temple, their roots the foundation, their canopy the roof, the sky above the sacred opening. But one temple rose above all others. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. Ephesus was a city on the western coast of Asia Minor, in what is now the country of Turkey, where the Aegean Sea meets the land in a long, complicated coastline of bays and peninsulas. It was a great and prosperous city, one of the largest in the ancient world, and at its heart, on a wide flat plain between the hills and the sea, stood the temple. It was enormous. It measured, at its greatest extent, more than 400 feet in length and over 200 feet wide. It rose on a massive stepped platform of white marble. Its roof was supported by more than 100 columns, each one 60 feet high, each one carved from a single piece of marble, each one covered in carved reliefs of animals and hunts and sacred scenes. The columns caught the sunlight and scattered it into the surrounding space, so that approaching the temple on a bright morning was like approaching a thing that was made of light itself. The ancient writer Antipater of Sidon, listing the 7 wonders of the ancient world, wrote of the temple in terms that still arrest the attention across the centuries. He had seen the great pyramids of Egypt. He had stood at the foot of the walls of Babylon. He had looked up at the enormous statue of Zeus at Olympia. And he said that when he saw the temple at Ephesus, the other wonders seemed, beside it, small. Inside the temple, in the dim and incense-scented interior that filtered the blazing Aegean sunlight down to something cool and amber, stood the cult statue of Artemis. She was a figure unlike the lithe and silver-bowed huntress of the later Greek imagination. She was ancient, layered and complex and multiple, her form adorned with tiers of what have been called many things through the centuries, perhaps eggs or breasts or animal heads or sacred fruits, a visual accumulation of all the things she was protector of, all of life, all of fertility, all of the wild and growing and multiplying world. Because in Ephesus, Artemis was not simply the hunter in the forest. She was the mother of the wild world, the protector of everything that lived and breathed and reproduced and grew. She was the force behind the teeming abundance of the natural world. Both things were true of her. Both always had been, the silver bough and the wild forest, and also the deep maternal protectiveness of everything alive. Pilgrims came to Ephesus from across the ancient world. They sailed from Egypt and from Rome, from the islands of the Aegean and from the cities of Greece and the Persian Empire. They came bearing offerings, small terracotta figures, fruits, flowers, animals, jewelry. They came with specific needs, protection in childbirth, healing for a sick child, guidance in a time of uncertainty. They came simply to be in the presence of something immeasurably ancient and kind. The temple was burned and rebuilt. It was sacked and restored. It was one of the most visited sites in the ancient world for nearly 1,000 years. The ground beneath it is old beyond our ability to fully imagine, layered with centuries of devotion and prayer, with the ash of 10,000 sacred fires and the footprints of 10,000 generations of pilgrims. What remains of it now in the physical world is modest. A single reconstructed column standing among the low foundations in a field, storks nesting at its capital, a pond nearby where frogs sing at dusk. But if you can let the mind's eye add what was once there, column after column rising into the morning sky, marble gleaming, the air thick with the resin of burning sacred wood, the distant sound of hymns, it becomes, even at this distance of centuries, magnificent. Breathe slowly. The temple rises around you in the imagination, and it is cool inside, and the light is amber, and somewhere behind the great columns, beyond the incense smoke, You sensed the presence of something very old and very patient, watching over everything it was given to protect. Religion in ancient Greece was not an abstract thing. It was not confined to stone temples or special days. It was woven into the ordinary fabric of life, into the morning and the evening, into the hunt and the harvest, into the birth of children and the tending of the sick and the passage of seasons. Artemis was worshipped everywhere. In the city, at a small shrine at the crossroads near the market, a woman might leave a small clay figure, a prayer whispered for the safe delivery of a child expected soon. On the edge of a farm, where the cultivated land met the wild scrubland beyond, a farmer might leave a few apples and a handful of salt, asking that the goddess keep the wolves from his flock this winter. A hunter entering the forest before dawn might pause at the bark of a particular oak tree where someone, generations ago perhaps, had carved a rough image of the goddess, and lay his hand flat against the bark and stand still for a moment in the dark before the pre-dawn. These were small acts, private acts, but they were genuine, and they accumulated over time into something enormous. A civilizational conversation with the divine, ongoing for centuries, a relationship between the human world and the wild world expressed in daily gesture and seasonal ritual. The great public festivals of Artemis were something else entirely. At Broron on the eastern coast of Attica, on the slopes above the lagoon where the egrets waded in the mornings, there was a sanctuary that had been sacred to her since before recorded history. The sanctuary consisted of a small temple and a series of colonnaded buildings arranged around an open courtyard, all of it built in the natural shelter of the hillside, the forest beginning immediately above the uppermost terrace. Every 4 years, a great festival was held at Broron in Artemis's honor. Young girls, mostly between the ages of 5 and 10, from noble Athenian families, came to serve the goddess for a period of time, living at the sanctuary, performing its rituals, learning its dances. They were the Arctoi, the little bears, and during the festival they performed a ritual dance that moved in slow circles, like bears, like the turning of the constellations, dressed in saffron yellow robes that caught the lamplight and made them glow like small flames in the forest dark. They were being prepared for the transition between childhood and adult life. They were being handed from the protection of one world to another. Artemis, goddess of the threshold between wild and civilized, between girl and woman, between the forest and the city. She received them and blessed them and returned them to the world changed. There were races, barefoot races through the sanctuary grounds, the girls running with total freedom in the sacred space, their hair loose, their laughter rising into the oak trees. There were offerings of toys, small childhood toys that were left at the goddess's altar as a mark of transition, a beautiful letting go. And there were torches, always torches. Artemis was worshipped at night, when the moon was high and the fires could be seen from the forest and the forest could be seen from the fires. The torchlit processions that moved through the Greek night in honor of Artemis are among the most beautiful images the ancient world has left us. Women and girls moving through darkness with their cupped flames, the light finding the white marble of the temple columns, the smoke rising into the still night air, the distant sound of hymns in the particular ancient mode that the Greeks used for sacred singing. A sound that, in descriptions of those who heard it, seemed to move through the body like water through stone. The night accepted the light. The forest received the prayers. And somewhere beyond the reach of the torches, in the deep darkness between the trees, something ancient and watchful was present. There is a thread that runs through all of Artemis's mythology, connecting the silver bough and the moonlit forest and the hunting dogs and the temple at Ephesus and the little girls dancing like bears at Broron. A thread that, when you trace it, reveals something essential about who she was. She protected those who could not protect themselves. Women in the dangerous transit of childbirth. Children at the edge of a world that was not designed with their smallness in mind. Young animals in the season before they were strong enough to outrun what hunted them. The wild places of the earth that had no voice and no vote in what was done to them. Artemis was always, in the deepest sense, a guardian. Her role as goddess of childbirth seems paradoxical at first. This sworn virgin, this unbound huntress, what did she know of the intimate vulnerability of motherhood? But the Greeks understood it differently. They saw her as the goddess of the critical threshold, the moment of passage, the crossing between one state of being and another, and childbirth was the most dangerous such crossing a woman could face. When a woman's labor began and the outcome was uncertain, the lamps were lit for Artemis. The prayers were whispered, the small offerings were set out, and the ancient Greeks believed sincerely. With the same sincerity they believed in the reality of the forest and the river and the mountain. That somewhere in the laboring woman's room, or just outside it, hovering at the threshold, was a silver-bowed goddess who understood thresholds, who had helped her own mother through the long labor on the island of Delos, who had placed her hands on the edge of that moment and kept faith with the one who was crossing it. For small children, Artemis was also a protector. They were placed under her care until they were old enough to move through the world with more safety. The festivals at Broron served this purpose too. The little girls in their saffron robes were being formally acknowledged as beings under the goddess's protection, their transition being witnessed and sanctified. For wild animals, her protection was absolute. No creature in her forest was harmed without necessity and without reverence. The old stories make clear that the animals knew her, that the deer came to her without fear, that the bears of Arcadia moved around her fire as if warming themselves at a hearth that was as much theirs as hers. There is a particular story from the Trojan War era, Artemis asking the great Greek fleet to pause before it sailed, asking for a specific act of reverence and acknowledgement before allowing those ships to pass. It was a powerful reminder, even to armies and kings, that there are forces in the world that cannot simply be sailed past without attention. That the natural world and the divine authority that spoke for it required acknowledgement. She was fierce in this protection. Fierce when she needed to be, in the way that still water can be fierce. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with an absolute and immovable certainty. But mostly she was quiet. Mostly she was present in the way that the moon is present. Not demanding acknowledgement, not requiring worship in every moment. Simply there. Illuminating. Watching. Available in the way that the night sky is always available to anyone who steps outside and looks up. Think of the things in your life that are under her care if you like that idea. The wild places you love. The small creatures you've noticed and appreciated. The vulnerable people in your world that you watch over in your own way. She would recognize you in that impulse. The impulse to protect without controlling. To care without possession. To watch over without consuming. That is hers, and it is yours. If you were to travel through ancient Greece looking for Artemis's sacred places, you would need to walk a long way. You would need to climb hills and follow rivers and push through forest undergrowth and wade through the shallows of lagoons and climb mountain paths where the stone was polished smooth by the feet of centuries of pilgrims. But the journey would be worth it, because her sanctuaries were in some of the most beautiful places in the ancient world. Begin on Delos, where we began, the small island in the Aegean where she was born. Walk up the path to the summit of Mount Cynthus, the path edged with the ruins of small shrines and votive offerings left by generations of devotees. At the summit, turn slowly and take in the sea, and the islands and the sky, and feel the wind that comes in from every direction at once. Then move to Ephesus, to the great temple on the plain. Stand in the shadow of those enormous columns and let your imagination rebuild what fire and time have taken down. Move north to the island of Lesbos, where there was a grove sacred to her at the edge of the olive country, where the trees grew in twisted, beautiful forms and the sea was visible from almost every point within it, and the air smelled of thyme and salt. Move to Delphi, high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, where the sanctuary of Apollo dominated the landscape but where his twin sister was never far, in the deep forests on the upper slopes above the oracle's cave, in the cold springs that emerged from the limestone and ran clear and thin down through the sacred groves. Move to Sparta, to the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia beside the Eurotas River, where ancient worship had some of the most complex ritual traditions in all of Greece, where the air was clear and cold from the nearby mountains and the river was swift and bright. Move to Arcadia, always back to Arcadia, to the Alpheos River Valley and the forests above Tegea and the high meadows near the summit of Mount Lycaon, where the sacred games were held and where something very ancient indeed was worshipped in forms that were older than the Greek gods themselves. Each place its own atmosphere. Each place its own quality of light and air and stone and water. Each place holding something of her. In the world's great sacred sites, there is often something that the visitors of all centuries have in common, a quality of attention, an instinctive quieting, a slowing of the breath. The places themselves seem to call for it, as if the long accumulation of reverence in the ground and the rock has created a kind of resonance that anyone can feel regardless of what they believe. If you could stand in any of Artemis's sacred places tonight, that is what you would feel. That quieting, that instinctive turning towards something old and real. Let it happen now. Wherever you are lying down, let the quieting come. We have walked with Artemis through so many of her stories, and always, just at the edge of the narrative, just at the periphery of the moonlit clearing, her brother is there. Apollo. They were born together on the same night on the same island, under the same palm tree beside the still lake. And in the Greek religious imagination, they were always conceived as paired. A duality, a balance, two aspects of light that needed each other to be complete. Apollo was solar. He was warmth and clarity and the direct illumination of the sun. The music that plays in the open air, the poetry that speaks truth without disguise, the prophetic voice that sees the future in the midday light. He was civilization's darling. The arts, the healing arts, the rational ordering of the cosmos. Artemis was lunar. She was coolness and mystery and the indirect, reflective illumination of the moon. The music that plays in the forest at night, the poetry that speaks truth through image and symbol, the prophetic intuition that comes not from seeing but from sensing. She was wildness's guardian. The natural world, the animal world, the uncivilized and the untamed. Between them, they held the full spectrum. Between them, they constituted something complete. They were fiercely loyal to each other. When Niobe, the queen of Thebes, made the terrible mistake of boasting that her children were superior to the divine children of Leto, that her 7 sons were worth more than Apollo and her 7 daughters worth more than Artemis, both twins responded together, silently, with their silver and golden bows. It was a terrible response by the moral standards of any age, and the Greeks knew it, and told the story of Niobe's weeping for centuries as a reminder of the kind of pride that forgets its own limits. But the loyalty between the twins was, in itself, something the Greeks considered beautiful. The idea of two beings so perfectly complementary, so essentially themselves and so fundamentally connected, moving through the world together without being the same thing, that was something worth naming and honoring. Apollo brought light in the day. Artemis carried it at night. Between them, the world was always lit. Let us come, now, toward the end of our journey together. The stories have been told. The myths have been gently laid before you like stones on a clear river bottom, visible through the water, each one distinct, each one carrying its own color and weight and meaning. Delos and the palm tree, the silver bough given by a father who loved his daughter enough to let her be exactly who she was. The nymphs in the amber evening light, Actaeon at the edge of the glade, Callisto turning in the stars, Orion placed in the winter sky with care, the temple at Ephesus gleaming in the morning sun, the little girls dancing like bears in saffron yellow in the torchlight. All of it, all of her. And now we have come to the quiet end of the night's walk through her mythology. We have come to the place where the stories give way to something simpler and more fundamental. The forest at night. The moon is high now, past its peak, beginning its long, slow arc down toward the western horizon. Its light falls through the pine canopy in long silver columns, and where it touches the forest floor it illuminates circles and pools of pale gold among the dark leaf litter and the pine needles and the exposed roots of the old trees. The hunting is long finished. The dogs lie curled at the fire's edge, their sides rising and falling in the deep, even rhythm of the untroubled sleep that dogs, alone among all creatures, seem to have perfected. The nymphs have scattered, to their streams, to their trees, to whatever warm and mossy place calls each of them down into rest. The sacred deer are in the deeper forest, standing still in the dark, their eyes half closed, their breathing slow. Artemis sits at the edge of a low cliff, at the edge of the forest's canopy, where she can look out across a long valley. She is still now, more still than you have seen her tonight, through all these stories of movement and pursuit and consequence and protection. Her silver bough is across her knees. Her hands rest lightly on either side of it. Her dark hair has come loose and falls around her shoulders in the way that happens after a long day in the wind. Her face is tilted slightly upward, toward the moon. Below her, The valley holds a river that catches the moonlight and holds it, a long bright thread running south through the dark hills. Mist moves above the river in slow, unhurried shapes. On the far hillside, in a meadow she can see clearly from here, something moves. A herd of horses, perhaps, or deer, crossing from one shadow to another in absolute silence. She watches them, as she always watches, as she has always watched. There is no need, tonight, for the bow, for the hunt, for the enforcing of sacred boundaries. Tonight is simply this: the moon and the valley and the forest, and the river carrying its light southward, and the animals moving freely in their darkness, and the goddess who loves them all and has always loved them, watching. Sometimes the Greeks were asked why Artemis did not simply leave the world, why a goddess of her power chose to remain in the forests, on the mountains, moving through the same valleys and rivers century after century, instead of ascending to Olympus permanently and leaving the world to its own devices. The answers they gave were various, but perhaps the simplest was this: because she cared, because the wild world needed watching, because the vulnerable, animal and human and divine, needed someone whose attention did not waver, whose presence did not diminish. Because love, in its deepest form, is a kind of watchfulness, a willingness to remain, to be present, to keep faith with the world even in its darkest and most difficult seasons. She keeps faith with it even now, if you believe such things are possible. In every forest that still stands, in every river that still runs clear, in every night sky where the moon is visible and the stars can be counted, in every wolf's howl heard from a great distance, across a valley, across a wilderness that is still, somehow, wild. She is there, and we are grateful for it. You have walked a long way tonight. You have walked the shores of Delos and felt the Aegean wind. You have stood beneath the columns of Ephesus and felt the marble warm from the day's sun. You have moved through the forests of Arcadia in the company of nymphs, their laughter ahead of you through the trees. You have sat at the edge of hidden pools and understood, in the deepest part of yourself, why certain spaces require reverence. You have looked up at winter stars and found Orion and Callisto and the Great Bear turning slowly overhead. You have walked beside something ancient, something that has been moving through the wild places of the world since before the first human city was built, since before the first road was laid, since before the first fire was lit in the first hearth in the first winter of human habitation. Something that will still be moving through those places when the last city has returned to grass. She is patient. She is old. She is kind in the way that ancient things are kind, not gently, not softly, not in the way of comfort given cheaply, but in the way of something that endures, something that holds the long view, something that keeps faith with the world not because the world has earned it, but because keeping faith is simply what she does. The moon is lower now. The fire is embers. The dogs are deeply asleep. The nymphs are in their trees and streams and pools, dreaming whatever nymphs dream. And the forest, the great dark patient forest, with its miles of roots and its centuries of growth and its 10,000 hidden lives. The forest breathes in and out with the slow rhythm of something that does not need to hurry, because it has already decided that it will be here for a very long time. Close your eyes now if you haven't already. Let the moonlight find you where you are. Let the sound of the forest, of wind through pine needles, of a distant stream, of an owl calling once and then falling back into silence. Let that sound be the last thing your waking mind holds. You are safe here. The watching does not stop when you sleep. The moon keeps its arc. The stars keep their slow wheel. The deer in the valley keep their quiet grazing. The dogs at the fire's edge keep breathing. And the silver-bowed goddess at the edge of the cliff keeps watching, over the valley and the river and the mist and the meadow, over all the sleeping things in all the sleeping world. Over you. Sleep now. The forest is here. Artemis is here. And the night is very, very long and very, very beautiful, and there is nothing left to do but rest inside it. Sweet dreams. Sleep well. The moon keeps watch.